It's recording. Okay, we're going to start in about 1 minute. If you can find a seat, that'd be great.
I'm going to sit back here. Do you want to sit right here? I'll sit back.
You ready? Okay, everyone, we're going to be getting started now. Good afternoon and welcome to KiDA's Innovation Series. My name is Kristen Coates and it's so exciting to have you all here today. So thank you for taking time out of your day to be here. This is our first lecture as part of KiDA's Innovation Series. And the intention of this series is to bring in outside experts so they can share their research with the public. KiDA is not affiliated with any of the speakers or organizations that participate in this series. It's merely intended to be a public service to inform you. This session today will be recorded, so please keep that in mind during the Q&A time. You can be discreet if you would like, but it will be recorded and probably posted on KiDA's website. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce our first speaker here today. It's Matthew Goodwin. He's come a long way to be here today, and we're so honored to have him.
Thanks. Because I don't have a mic, I'm going to try to project, but if at any point you can't hear me, like in the back, just raise a hand. Can I just get a sense of who I'm talking to? So how many of you are parents? Good, majority. And practitioners? And anybody self-identify on the spectrum? I'll share my. That's great. So it's an honor for me to be here. I have kind of an interesting story that I want to give you quickly to give you some perspective. Oh, I'm a wanderer. I'll try to stay put. Can you see me? I'm an experimental psychologist by training, so I got my PhD in. I've worked for 15 years at a Center for Autism in Rhode Island that primarily serves more severely affected children and adults. We see about 1,000 families a year. And I, for a very long time, was interested in working directly with this population. And so I'm going to have to toggle back. Was getting concerned that many of the individuals that we were trying to work with, who were primarily nonverbal and had a really difficult time expressing to us the kinds of things that were upsetting or stressing or disorganizing for them. And many of these individuals would look fine one day and not so good the next day. And it would be very difficult for me to make a prediction about which is which. And there was this real tendency to think, well, maybe we have some oppositional or some defiance, or I might make an inference that they don't have the cognitive skills to perform the task that I'm asking. Yet when put in a conducive environment with a familiar person and given some space and some pacing, they could perform very well. So I got interested in thinking about stress, thinking about arousal, thinking about anxiety as one of the things that may facilitate or inhibit some of their performance. But the problem that we started to have was, how do you document this and how do you understand this? So most stress research is really around doing cognitive interviewing and filling out surveys. Well, many of these folks couldn't do that for me. I could ask a parent, what do you think about your kid? And some are right, I think, most of the time, and some don't have a clue. They'd like to know just as much as I do. I'd also have parents say to me that their kid, so I would say the kid's looking nice and calm and relaxed, and a parent would say that they're just about to explode. Or I see a kid bouncing all over the environment, and I say they look very agitated, and the parent says, no, this is sort of how they always are. This also meant that I couldn't necessarily make an inference about their internal emotional arousal state based on their overt presentation. So I started to get interested in measurement. So how could we measure unobtrusively and wouldn't require any kind of conscious effort on the part of the kid, to tell me whether they're stressed or not. So I started to get interested in psychophysiology and recording ways that the body is responding to demand in the environment. The traditional way that you would do this is to take a person into a lab that they've never been to before, with a strange person that they've never met before, ask them to take off their shirt, put on a 3 to 12 lead ECG, I'm going to stick stickers on you, have your non-dominant hand on the table with 2 electrodes taped to those fingertips, then tell you do not move, because if you move you're going to mess up my data collection. Now I'm going to put a computer in front of you and play you audio and visual tones, and then I'm going to say just relax, just respond how you would normally respond, and then based on your response to those audio and video, I'm going to make some inference about your emotional state, your stress state. So just quick raise of hands of the individuals on the spectrum that you know, how many do you think could comply with that methodology? Right, so for those who can't see, there's no hands. For those who do comply, do you think they're responding to the audio and the visual tones being presented, or is there perhaps some additional stress factors going on in that environment? So the data that I get, even when I do get that data, I have to question a little bit about how valid is it. The other issue is those who do comply and those who do make it through the protocol and who contribute their data, are they representative of the folks that we're really most interested in understanding and serving? So I'm giving you this sort of long background because this is ultimately why I started to get interested in computer science and working with computer scientists. There are 2 different fields, one called ubiquitous computing. These are computer scientists who are interested in putting sensors in built spaces. So these are audio, this is microphones, this is video, these may be RFID tags or beacons so you have some sense of where people are in object relations. And they're usually confined to a built space. There's another field in computer science called wearable computing. So these folks are interested in not being constrained by a space, but putting sensors on people's bodies. So that's weaving them into articles of clothing, that's putting them in accessories that we wear often, things that we carry around with us. The commonality of the 2 is that you are non-invasively, at a distance, recording some information about the environment and the person, and that this is all time synced, and all of that data can be stored at some central source, time aligned, and then you can view it in real time or in offline. So it seemed to me that if I could get bright computer scientists interested in the issues of autism, that instead of bringing individuals with autism into the lab to understand them, we could take the lab to them. And so what I want to show you today is a number of different technologies we've developed to try to help us better understand individuals with autism better who can't comply with laboratory-based methods, but then also use these technologies as assistive devices to help those individuals express themselves better, or for help to help caregivers and paraprofessionals to better understand and support them. All the while, because you're recording, you're documenting a response to intervention. Okay, so I probably don't need to tell you all that this is a public health concern. Autism is very much on the rise. About 1% of the population. We don't know what's causing this rise. There's a tremendous amount of research that's going into genetics, into neuroscience, and now into epidemiology. So this is the effect that the environment is having on those genes, and those genes changing in a person's lifetime. But which genes, which environmental factors, and which neurological systems are affected is still very much an unknown to us. What we do know is that the majority of those on the spectrum require some specialized care. And we don't really have time to wait to understand what's causing this disorder before we have to start supporting and helping. So that's where you start to see these costs get very high. That's $35 billion per year for the US cohort. That's $3.2 million over the lifetime for a given individual. So this has now started to get economists and public health people really serious about, we need to understand not only what's causing autism, but how can we help individuals who currently have the disorder. Something else I want to point out is that this disorder is defined by what we call a triad of impairment. So that's socialization, communication, qualitative impairments, socialization, communication, and restricted and repetitive behavior. But we see a higher rate of what we call comorbidity, so these are co-occurring conditions in autism, than in the typical developing population, of sensory processing disorder, learning impairment, motor impairment, seizure disorder, sleep disorder, eating problems, gastrointestinal, self-injury, depression, anxiety, obsession, compulsive disorder. I'm making this point because just having these 3 different characteristics for a given individual, if you're not addressing some of these problems, you're not going to make that much progress for a given individual. There's also the issue that these comorbid symptoms are likely exacerbating some of the social communication and restricted behavior. We can't treat them in isolation like they're not affecting them. This is a multivariate condition, and we really have to think around a whole organism and an individual person. It's sort of cliche now in the field to say if you've met one individual with autism, you've met one individual with autism. It's true that they share this triad, but it may express itself very interestingly. And a nice little tidbit, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is what we use to diagnose and classify autism. There are a number of different items that one can select to meet criteria for autism. In fact, there are so many items that there are over 600 permutations of how you could get a diagnosis. Let alone personality, let alone all the various other factors that go into personality. So something else to be aware of, this is a survey of studies that were funded that then resulted into published research projects. It's a few years old now. I haven't seen another report up, but it's from '73 to 2004. And basically what you'll see here is the majority of what gets funded and the work that gets done goes into neuroscience and into genetics. Now, I think that it's really critically important that we do that research, but none of that so far has translated into any clinical understanding or care for people who currently carry the disorder. It's all future-oriented. Right? These are going to be discoveries that are made for generations beyond our own. So I really want to make the argument that we need to think about doing work and free up resources that help individuals who currently need support. Right? Most of the funding in autism doesn't do that. Now we see a steep increase in autism. We're seeing increases in available services, but we're still not going to bridge that gap. And so part of the argument that myself and others have made is if we could develop technology to help connect the relatively few experts to families, paraprofessionals, and providers, and transfer some of the knowledge between that expert and those caregivers, and have some ability to evaluate whether the caregivers are implementing the interventions we're suggesting, we may take some of the burden off of the service provision and transfer some of that information to households and schools. This would make up some of the discrepancy in the funds available and the number of people who currently have a disorder. So the two fields I mentioned to you, ubiquitous computing and wearable computing, this is something that you can also call telemetrics. So in addition to actually recording that information, there's some pretty nice affordances, some nice aspects that from a research standpoint are really very different than the way we traditionally do behavioral science. One is that we can often see increased compliance because there's less behavioral reactivity. These sensors are embedded in your classroom. They're embedded in your home. They may be embedded in your clothes. It's not like there's somebody following you around with a clipboard, and while they're trying to measure you, are actually creating some new stimulus that you may be responding to. We talk about ecological validity too. It's one thing to bring someone in a lab and record their behavior, but if I don't really see someone in the real world and record their behavior there, I can't be sure that how they performed in that laboratory setting is indicative of what their real life behavior is like. So we can get around that by sampling behavior in the places that they naturally inhabit. We also, because these devices can record continuously. I don't have to pay them, they don't work a 9 to 5, and they don't get tired. We can get repeated assessments. So I can look at individuals and how they're changing across environment, across time, across interaction with different people. It also enables me to get many different channels of information. So I can get something about their overt behavior, I can get something about their physiology, I can get something about the kind of interactions that they're having with different objects. And to the extent that you are seeing phenomenon and you've got data capture and analysis capabilities, you can provide just-in-time feedback. So I can use some of these sensor streams to indicate when would be an appropriate time to intervene with or support an individual and what I should do. So to give you an example of that, there are many individuals with autism who engage in challenging behaviors. Right? So this is self-injury, this is aggression, this may be property destruction, this may be elopement or getting up and running away. These are the things that make it hard for them to be in mainstream school settings. These are hard things to keep them at home with you or for them to hold a job. By the time that we're aware that there is an issue for that person, it's usually when we've seen them engage in the behavior. We're often not watching them and seeing them ramp up, right? But clearly that's happened. No one goes 0 to 60 in 1 second. if someone is going to have a tantrum, if someone's going to engage in self-injury, there's probably a lead-in period. So we're interested in some capability that if we're doing sensing all the time, if I can detect that ramp up before you know it, I could send you a signal that, hey, you might want to attend to your kid, and see if you could intervene prior to them engaging in that tantrum, engaging in that self-injury. And the extent to which you're able to do that, you've just avoided that meltdown, that tantrum. So I've been working with a number of folks. We're actually writing a book right now, trying to basically advocate for technology and the affordances it may provide, as I'm suggesting to you, in the field. So I publish in computer science journals about why autism is an interesting issue and push technology forward. But I'm also trying to get the autism community to really think about how technology can help them better do research and better provide intervention. So what I'm going to do, I'm sort of speaking fast because there's a lot I want to show you. I can slow down a little bit here, but there are about 4 different platforms that we've been working on. Most of this work began while I was at the MIT Media Lab. Rosalind Picard was my faculty mentor there when I did a postdoc, and a number of research scientists and her students have been my primary collaborators in this. But I'll show you some work where we've done wireless recording of autonomic nervous system. We've done some work in doing non-contact measures of sympathetic arousal off the face using a webcam. I can show you some work with wireless movement sensors and pattern recognition to detect automatically hand flapping and body rocking, trying to understand about repetitive motor movements. And then we've done some work with pattern recognition of facial features. So we can automate expressions on the face. And then, if there's time, we've done some work with dense video and audio capture in the home over a 3-year period, and showing some pretty nice data analytic capabilities that you can automatically detect behaviors of interest. So I probably don't need to spend too much time on this. The characteristics of autism, the kind of maladaptive behaviors that they engage in, issues of anxiety disorders, panic disorders, sensory processing impairments. We have empirical validation that these are all significant issues above and beyond the diagnosis of autism. You can imagine that if you're sensitive to the environment, if you can't communicate, if you like routine, if you have comorbid anxiety issue, that the world is going to be a very stressful place, right? Because it's unpredictable, and you may not have the skills to self-regulate and to self-cope, or to easily ask others in the environment to come and help you and serve as a buffer. And this stress is very real, and I show this diagram because I think it's sort of interesting to know where this is coming in. You know, the first arrow here in the top left-hand corner is the cortex. This is appraisal. Right? So before any kind of physiological activity in the body, so I'm not talking about pain, I'm not talking about heat, I'm not talking about direct sensation. I'm talking about a perception that something in the environment is happening that is now going to require me to engage in some sort of change to regulate. And if I decide that there is something in the environment that is potentially threatening to me, I recruit within my limbic system 2 very old brain structures. The amygdala, which in a simplified term is sort of threat detection, and the hippocampus, which is really around memory of previous salient events. And if the amygdala, so if I say I'm concerned, the amygdala says I'm concerned, the hippocampus says yes, I'm concerned, we're going to get a signal rapidly with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis down the brainstem, onto the top of the kidneys and the adrenal gland. And now you're in a system called the autonomic nervous system. So this is a peripheral system to the central nervous system, and it's got 2 primary branches. You have a sympathetic, which we call this the fight or flight. You can think of this as an accelerator in a car. And then we have the parasympathetic, also called the rest and digest. You can think of this as a brake in the car. All these body organs in between, your eyes, your mouth, your lungs, your heart, your skin, your stomach, your pancreas, your reproductive function, is innervated by these 2 systems. And in a potential threatening situation, we reflexively, we don't have to think about this. In a sympathetic state, our pupils will dilate. We'll start to breathe so we can take in more visual information. We're going to start breathing faster so you get more oxygen into your bloodstream. Your heart's going to beat faster to get blood to your arms and your legs. So you can confront or fight whatever this thing is, or you can flee from it. It's going to inhibit digestion, it's going to inhibit salivation, which is why speakers get water when they talk because they get a little gummy. It's going to restrict the blood from the surface of your skin. That's why when somebody jumps out and scares you, your face goes flush. So if you were to get scratched or bitten, you're not going to bleed out as much. You're going to perspire more because you're going to cool your body down as it's going to be more ready to engage in the fight or flight. Once that stressor is removed, if you survive, parasympathetic is going to come into play and do the converse of everything that I just mentioned to you. And the reason why I'm spending a little time on this is these are very, very old mammalian systems in the brain. These happen without any conscious control. These are, as far as we can tell, just as perfectly intact in individuals with autism as they are in typically developing individuals. And what is convenient about these systems is we can detect changes in pupillary diameter. On the surface of the skin, I can detect your heart rate, I can detect your respiration, and I can detect your perspiration. So a number of psychophysiologists for years have been recording these kinds of measures to get indices of people's stress reaction or cognitive or perceptual kind of challenges. Now, if you have high rates of panic, high rates of fear, high rates of anxiety, high rates of sensory processing disorder, if he can't tell you what's stressing you, and a person can't necessarily infer, then we sort of came to the conclusion that, well, why don't we see if bodies can tell us instead? But given the issues that I mentioned before about wired systems in laboratory settings, that wasn't going to scale. So shortly after I got to the media lab, Roz Picard had been doing work in wireless ambulatory measures of sympathetic arousal. And she had some grad students at the time who were taking this the next step forward and seeing if we could not only record wirelessly in real time, but if we could stream and let individuals visualize their data as it's being recorded. And subsequently, they spun off a company to make these commercially available. I do have a financial disclosure that I'm on the scientific advisory board, and I do get equity stock. So I'm not selling you devices. I couldn't even, if you asked me, I could put you in touch with people if you are interested, but I want to make that known. So what this is it's a wrist-worn or an ankle-worn bracelet. It records electrodermal activity, which is skin conductance. That's a primarily sympathetic measure, so it's really a measure of the fight or flight response. It also records 3-axis acceleration, so that's movement in a 3-dimensional space, and it records temperature. It stores all of that data locally onto a drive, and I think you can get about 3 months of data. Battery will run for about 24 hours. And we've been using this, and then there's a software program that lets you visualize the skin conductance, visualize the temperature, and visualize the acceleration. The reason why we have temperature and acceleration in here is if I see a change in your electrodermal activity, I don't know if that's because you've just transitioned from a cold environment to a warm, or vice versa, because that's going to change your perspiration. Or if you're physically active versus sedentary, that's going to change your perspiration. If you are in a constant heated environment and you're not moving, and I see great big changes in your electrodermal activity, I've got a better sense of something cognitive, something perceptual, something affective is probably driving the change in that skin conductance. So we use these 2 other measures really to sort of disentangle, decouple, or co-vary out their influence on the electrodermal activity. I'll show you that there's some interesting things that you can do with just the acceleration and just the temperature. So this is a little awkward because of the distance here, but I'm going to show you if I can build this. My skin conductance in real time. So I'm wearing a sensor on my wrist here. So if you can see, oops, sorry, I just blinded. This is my skin conductance here. This is my temperature. This is my movement. Now this is the easiest to see because I actually have some control over that. It's hard for me to, I have to really close my eyes to try to get this skin conductance down. It's a little bit, I seem like some calm, cool, and collected. It's actually a little bit stressful. But you work. If I am in the Y plane, you see red is the primary line. And if I'm in the X plane, you see green is the primary line. And if I'm in the Z plane, you see blue is the primary line. Now if I flip my hand over, right, you're going to get the converse of all of them. See we're at the top now, green down below, and blue here. So, and as this is recorded from my Pioneer, this is within a second. That's now transmitting to this Bluetooth receiver. Now, if I leave proximity of this Bluetooth receiver, it may not continue to broadcast the data, but all that data is still being stored locally. So afterwards, I could go back, plug this into my computer, and download all of that data. And the other thing is there's a button on here. If I press this, you now see it just put an event mark in the stream. So this is my real-time trace. This is my long-term trace. So if something happened in the environment, and this is the sensor is synced to the computer clock. So right now I have to do a little journal. But if something really significant happens to me, I could hit this button, write down the time and what it was. Then later on, I could go back and I could start looking at what effect that particular event, that thought, or that interaction happened in this field. And now I'd like to show you a couple ways that we have been using it. One thing that's important to know, we have validated this with gold standard, FDA-approved wired sensors. So one thing that one's always concerned about when you develop a new technology is that you're recording what you think you're recording. And so we've actually done a number of studies. This is the first that's been published, where we ask individuals to ride a bike. So we have a physical demand, we have them do a cognitive demand, and we have them do an affective demand. And we were recording as your sort of traditional wired way, and also while they're wearing our sensor on the wrist. And you'll see that at baseline, during the task demand, and recovery, across all three different kinds of challenges, we're 0.9 and above, which means 90% of our recordings map to recordings of what was there. So we have some scientific validity when I say that this is a measure of electrodermal activity. It in fact is. So this is a study, we're still doing data analysis on this, but this is with Lucy Jean Miller and her group out in Colorado. Lucy is the head of the Sensory Processing Disorder Foundation, and the STAR Center is the clinic. And this work with Rosalind Picard, and Elliot Hedman was really the lead on the data collection and now some analysis. He's a doctoral student of Rosa's. We had 22 kids who undergo occupational therapy sessions. These are about an hour long. And we had between 3 and 4 of their sessions per person, where we videotaped that session, and then the child was wearing one of these Q sensors, actually the predicate device to this, on each of their ankles. And then we've time-aligned the video, time-synced it with the physiological data. So what I can do for you is now play back, where you can see the child's behavior in session, and you can see their internal physiological arousal. So what she's got on her ears and what she's got on her face is not any of our recording instrumentation. She's actually doing a listening program while she's engaging in occupational therapy. But I'm going to go through this kind of quick, but the only access the OT. So OTs are there any OTs here, by the way? Okay. So correct me if I don't say this right, but my understanding, I'm not an OT, is you're really thinking about regulation. You're thinking about this child sort of being engaged in the environment. So sometimes if they're not engaged enough, we have to get them engaged. If they're too engaged, we have to help them sort of calm down. There's something we call the Yerkes-Dodson curve. So there's sort of this sweet spot. Too little arousal, we don't get good performance. Too much arousal, we get disengagement, we get poor performance. So my understanding is what OT really does is helps a child sort of get into that optimal area of arousal through a variety of different means. And then once there, this frees this individual up to take in information, the processing information, and give them a response. Is that fair? So these OTs are very talented, there's no question. They're seeing a lot of kids, they're a good read on behavior. But I think kids who are nonverbal and kids who may have very high sort of rates of challenging behavior, it can be difficult to predict whether they're under-aroused or over-aroused, whether that child is engaging in these behaviors to increase their arousal intentionally, or if they're so overwhelmed that they're engaging in these behaviors because they feel like there's no other choice and it's sort of fight or flight. So we got interested in working with OTs of, well, what if I could record for you the internal state of your kids while you're working with them, and then go back and review a number of things. So the study that's happening now is the teachers are now blind to these videos. We've chunked the videos to play back where the arousal is increasing, staying the same, or decreasing. And then they're going to make a rating. Does the child look like they're calm? Do they look like they're aroused, or do they look like they're sort of underlying? And then is your intent to increase their arousal, keep it the same, or to decrease it? And then which intervention, so which of the different activities did you select? And then was it in the desired direction, as we'll find out later? And then was it effective or not? So once that video is coded, and that's what's happening now, then we lift the blind, and we can ask a number of interesting questions. There's synchrony or dyssynchrony between observed behavior and physiology. There's, does the therapist